Long before it stretched across 3 continents, the Ottoman state was a small frontier principality surviving on the edges of a collapsing empire. And like all early warlords, its first currency was conquest itself. The Ottomans did not begin with vaults of gold or sophisticated central banks. They began with the sword, the horse, and a system of reward that turned plunder into policy. Every successful raid, every captured fortress, every subdued rival chieftain brought more land, more captives, and more tribute. This was the Gaza economy, where warfare was not just an extension of politics, but the very engine of state formation. But conquest alone cannot sustain a dynasty for 6 centuries, so the early Ottomans did something remarkably pragmatic. They institutionalized the spoils. When a region fell, it was rarely burned to the ground. Instead, it was surveyed, registered, and integrated. The conquered lands were divided into Timars, grants of revenue given not as permanent property, but as temporary trusts. A Sipahi, a cavalryman, would be assigned a Timar in exchange for military service. He collected taxes from the peasants, kept a portion for himself, and forwarded the rest to the state treasury. In return, he was obligated to appear for campaign with armor, weapons, and a retinue. No standing army required, no massive payroll to maintain in peacetime, just a decentralized military financial network that expanded as the empire expanded. The system was brilliant in its simplicity. It tied land directly to loyalty and loyalty directly to warfare, but it also demanded constant expansion. When the frontiers stopped moving, the Timar system began to strain. Yet for nearly 2 centuries, it worked. The Ottomans moved into the Balkans, crossed into Anatolia, and eventually laid siege to Constantinople. Each campaign was funded not by borrowing from bankers in Venice or Genoa, but by the lands they had already taken. Tax registers were meticulously kept. Every village, every orchard, every mill, every herd of sheep was recorded. Peasants paid in kind or in coin, and the state took its share through a predictable, if heavy, fiscal burden. But the Ottomans also understood the value of trade. As they captured key ports and overland routes, they did not just tax merchants, they protected them. Caravanserais were built, roads were paved, markets were regulated. The empire became a crossroads, and the crossroads became a treasury. Yet none of this would have lasted without a rigid administrative spine. The devshirme system fed not only the Janissary corps, but also the bureaucratic elite. These were men trained in the capital, loyal only to the sultan, and tasked with managing the very finances that kept the war machine running. They audited Timars, tracked tax yields, and ensured that the wealth of conquest flowed back to the center. In those early centuries, the Ottoman Empire did not just fight wars, it financed them by turning conquest into a renewable resource. Land became revenue, revenue became soldiers, soldiers became more land. It was a cycle that required momentum, and for 200 years, the Ottomans never ran out of it.
By the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had reached its territorial zenith. From the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Persian Gulf, from Algiers to Basra, the Sultan's authority stretched across continents. But empire at this scale does not pay for itself. The old Timar system, built on continuous frontier expansion, was beginning to crack. Campaigns were longer, distances were greater. The cost of gunpowder, artillery, and naval fleets could no longer be covered by a cavalryman collecting grain from a single village. The state needed liquid cash. And so, a quiet revolution began in the empire's financial architecture. The Timar gave way to tax farming, a system where the state auctioned the right to collect taxes to the highest bidder. Wealthy individuals, often merchants, local notables, or even military officers, would pay the treasury in advance for the privilege of extracting revenue from a province. The state got its money up front. The tax farmer took the risk. If he collected more than he paid, he kept the surplus. If harvests failed or rebellions broke out, he absorbed the loss. On paper, it seemed like a brilliant solution to a cash-hungry empire. In practice, it planted the seeds of long-term instability. Tax farmers had little incentive to invest in the land or protect the peasantry. Their goal was extraction, not sustainability. But in the short term, it worked. The imperial coffers swelled. The Janissaries were paid in silver. The navy received copper for cannons. And the bureaucracy expanded into a sophisticated machine of accountants, auditors, and financial inspectors. Yet the Ottomans were not immune to global economic forces. The 16th century brought a flood of New World silver into Europe, and through trade networks, it seeped into Ottoman markets. The primary silver coin began to lose its purchasing power. Prices rose, wages stagnated. The state responded the way many pre-modern governments did. It debased the currency. Silver content was reduced. New coins were issued with lower purity. Inflation spiraled. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Provincial governors withheld revenue. The central treasury found itself in a constant race to maintain liquidity. But the Ottomans adapted. They reformed the coinage, standardized tax assessments, created specialized financial councils, and experimented with state monopolies over salt, soap, and strategic metals. More importantly, they leaned into their geographic advantage. The empire controlled the eastern terminus of the spice routes, the northern shores of the Mediterranean, and the overland corridors linking Asia to Europe. Even as European ships began rounding Africa, Ottoman merchants and naval forces maintained dominance in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. Trade duties, customs fees, and market regulations continued to generate massive revenues. The empire did not just survive the economic turbulence of the 17th century, it absorbed it. Provincial elites grew wealthier, the central state negotiated rather than dictated, and the military transitioned from a frontier cavalry force to a complex, multi-branch institution requiring steady financial support. The Ottomans were no longer funding war through conquest alone, they were funding it through bureaucracy, through credit, through the quiet, grinding machinery of imperial finance. And for a time, it was enough.
The 18th century brought a reckoning. The frontiers that had once expanded now contracted. Russia pushed southward. Austria fortified its borders. Naval power shifted toward European fleets that outgunned and outmaneuvered Ottoman squadrons. Every lost war meant lost territory. Every lost territory meant lost tax revenue. The empire could no longer rely on conquest to fill its coffers. Instead, it began to pay for peace. Indemnities, reparations, and the cost of maintaining standing armies drained the treasury. In response, the Ottoman state turned to a solution that would ultimately seal its financial fate. It borrowed money. At first, the loans were modest. European merchants, often operating under commercial capitulations, extended credit to provincial governors and imperial officials. These capitulations, originally granted as commercial privileges to secure alliances, had become economic concessions that allowed foreign traders to operate with low tariffs and legal immunity. Ottoman manufacturers could not compete. Domestic industries withered. The balance of trade tilted steadily against the empire. Gold and silver flowed out. Debt flowed in. By the early 19th century, the borrowing had become systematic. The state needed funds to modernize the army, to build railroads, to maintain a navy that could challenge European powers. European banks were eager to lend. The loans came with interest, with collateral, and with conditions. At first, the empire managed to service the debt. It raised taxes. It sold state assets. It even attempted financial reforms under visionary statesmen who tried to create a modern treasury and introduce paper currency. But the debt grew faster than the economy. A series of crop failures, military defeats, and administrative inefficiencies pushed the empire to the brink. In the mid-1700s, the Ottoman state defaulted. It simply could no longer pay. The response from European creditors was swift and unprecedented. They did not invade. They did not occupy. They created a financial commission. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration was established, an entity run by European representatives that took direct control of key revenue streams. Tobacco, salt, silk, fisheries, customs duties, these were no longer collected for the capital. They were collected for London, Paris, Berlin, and Vienna. The commission paid the empire's foreign creditors first. Only the remainder went to the Sultan's government. It was a sovereign bankruptcy, administered by foreign hands. Yet even in this humiliation, the empire survived. The debt administration, paradoxically, brought a degree of fiscal discipline. Revenue collection improved. Corruption was curbed. Infrastructure projects were funded. But the cost was autonomy. The Ottoman state was no longer financing its own wars. It was financing its survival through European capital. And when the 20th century arrived, the empire found itself trapped in a financial web it could no longer untangle. The reformers inherited a treasury already mortgaged. The Balkan Wars stripped away the last productive provinces. The Great War demanded resources the empire simply did not have. It printed more currency. It requisitioned grain. It conscripted boys and men alike. The old cavalry grants were a distant memory. The tax farms had been replaced by centralized taxation. But the money was gone. And the war machine, once fueled by conquest, then by bureaucracy, was now running on borrowed time.
When the dust settled after the First World War, the Ottoman Empire was gone, not by sudden invasion,
but by financial exhaustion, administrative fragmentation, and the slow unraveling of a system that had once been the envy of its age. The post-war treaties attempted to partition what remained, but it was the peace negotiations that drew the final lines. The new republic inherited a fractured economy, a devastated population, and a legacy of 6 centuries of imperial finance. But to view the Ottoman financial story solely as a tale of decline is to miss its true significance. For over half a millennium, this state managed to fund continuous warfare, territorial expansion, bureaucratic centralization, and cultural patronage without relying on modern banking in its early centuries. It built a system where land equaled loyalty, where trade routes equaled revenue, where adaptation was not an exception but a necessity. Every reform, every monetary adjustment, every foreign loan was a response to a specific crisis. Each worked until it did not. And when it failed, the empire did not collapse overnight. It negotiated, it reformed, it survived longer than almost any of its contemporaries. The real lesson of how the Ottomans paid for 600 years of war is not found in any single coin or ledger. It is found in their willingness to change the rules of the game while still keeping the board intact. They understood that war is not won on the battlefield alone. It is funded in the treasury, collected in the villages, traded in the ports, and sustained by the quiet endurance of millions who paid the price. If you want more deep dives into the hidden mechanics of history, the economic engines behind empires, and the untold stories that shaped the modern world, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I will see you in the next video.